Well, welcome to the Line Podcast. We are recording this on Carney Day, otherwise known to the rest of you out there as, you don't even know what the date. What is the date, Jen?
It is March 14th.
March the 14th, 2025, forever to be known in the annals of human history as Carney Day. Obviously, when we come back right after our little opening jingle here, we're going to talk Carney. We're going to talk cabinet. We're going to talk about how the Conservatives are responding. That's, as you can imagine, going to be our lead item today. When we take a quick break after that, the Trudeau legacy. Our colleague Andrew Potter had very harsh words for the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister. That's going to take some getting used to. On our website this morning, we're going to discuss that. We're going to talk some of the bigger picture, including a story Jen's been following on the last hours of the Trudeau premiership, and we'll tell you all about that in a couple of moments. And then as well, we're going to wrap up Trump Watch. We're going to wrap up all the craziness that's fit to podcast. All that and more in the latest episode of the Line Podcast. This episode of the Line Podcast has been brought to you by Unsmoke Canada, which is dedicated to helping Canadians who are looking to quit smoking understand the full range of options available. Despite decades of government programs and increasing regulations, today, nearly 4 million Canadians still smoke cigarettes. Adult smokers who choose to continue to smoke should be aware that other options exist. While not risk-free, alternatives such as heated tobacco, vaping products, and oral smokeless products provide a potentially less harmful choice. Smoke-free alternatives do not involve combustion or burning like smoking a cigarette does. Instead of heavily restricting access and information about these options, Canada's government should be adopting common sense legislation that will help further bring down Canada's smoking rates and put information in the hands of Canadians. Information such as the relative risks compared to cigarettes. Because the products are not the same and they shouldn't be treated the same, it's just common sense. Learn more about how a smoke-free future can be achieved at Unsmoke.ca. It seems like a stupid day, Jen, to open the podcast with some housekeeping, but I actually have to today, and I'm going to tell everybody why. Busy day in the news, tons of news to discuss, but I want everybody to just lend me their ears for 1 minute here. We've made some technical changes here at the Line, and it might affect your podcast viewing or listening experience. It shouldn't on the listening side, and these aren't bad changes. It's just we're using some different software now. So just as a heads up, you will probably get going live notifications before this episode launches. We're not live. These are pre-recorded. We publish them as soon as possible after we record them, but they will not be live, but we're going to be launching them live using a different software, which will hopefully, first of all, help us with the algorithms. We're not above admitting that. But also it's going to give you, particularly on platforms like YouTube and some of the social media apps we're connecting to, going to give you live chat capability. So you and other people who are enjoying or hating the podcast will be able to talk to each other in real time. And we hope you enjoy that. The other thing we want to mention is that as part of this revamped effort where we're going to be publishing our podcast differently, we have added a bunch of new social media channels, and we want everyone to have a chance to follow those. I'm not going to read them all. It's a long list. We're going to put them in the data for the episode, and we're going to put them on our website. So a bunch of new places where you can follow along with all the great Line content. These places, guys, often they limit our usability until we have over 50 or 100 followers. It would be a huge favor for us if you use these apps, if you could go to our accounts and follow us. It'll help us kind of really hit the ground running here. And Jen, that is the extent of my housekeeping. Sorry, I know it's a busy news day, bad day to have to do this, but we've been working on this for a while, and this is the week where we're hitting go. So, Jen, tell me, before we talk about Carney, tell me about your failed attempt to reach the Mecca of Edmonton.
No, first I'm going to talk to you about how you know it's mid-March in Alberta. Do you want to know how it's mid-March in Alberta? You know it's mid-March in Alberta because I am both sneezing and it's snowing at the same time. So if I have to suddenly pause the podcast in order to deal with the goop coming out of my early spring allergies, please do forgive me for it. A charming individual, I promise. I swear. So secondly, I was actually supposed to be doing this podcast from Edmonton today. I was supposed to be doing it from a hotel room with, my usual classy self. And that was because I was supposed to be doing a political panel up with the Alberta Chamber of Commerce in Edmonton. And I had to do something that I almost never have to do in Alberta, being a pretty hardened and seasoned Albertan at this point. I had to turn the car around because I started driving the car out and was like listening to this podcast that was making me scream. And then I wanted to call my husband to talk to him about how the podcast was making me scream. And as I was talking to my husband, I realized I had that Ralph Wiggum voice in the back of my head and like, I'm in danger. Because the fog was so Stephen King-esque, so thick that I could not see more than 20 meters ahead of me. And it was ice fog, so like the road was slippery at the same time. And then I was like, I don't like this. So I pulled over, like got off the highway as soon as I could, and then realized it's actually so bad I don't feel super safe driving back to Calgary. So I wound up spending a couple hours in Crossfield, Alberta, which I always love the opportunity to spend some time in small towns in Alberta because I never have the opportunity to do that. And I always find like cute little gems, like just gemmy restaurants that are amazing. One of these days I'm going to do a Jen Gerson's guide to random restaurants in strange places and small towns in Alberta. Because there's like amazing little restaurants. And I found this great little, I think it's Shirley's Diner. They had a great sort of like chili cheese fries. Amazing, like homemade chili, like your mom made. So good. And then I found another donut store. And those of us who have followed the Line podcast will know that I will sing the praises of Donut Mill to no end. I was hoping to go to Donut Mill this yesterday, but didn't. So I found another donut place in Crossfield, Alberta, and I think it was called the Donut Man. Pretty good. I don't know if it was Donut Mill good, but like up there, definitely better than chain restaurants. So if you're ever in Crossfield, they've got a donut place, they've got a decent little diner. Check them out. They were wonderful to me, so I really appreciate that. And then I drove back to Calgary. It was a weird day. Anyway, we want to get into it. And
thus concludes our segment on Prime Minister Mark Carney and his cabinet.
Exactly. Everybody was very curious about where I was yesterday. That's where I was. So apologies to the Alberta Chamber of Commerce for missing that one, and apologies to anybody who showed up to that event and missed the opportunity to hear me whine.
My final comment before we actually move on to the real news, I know that Calgary has a different weather pattern than Toronto, but I think my Toronto listeners will be able to verify this. We're in the coming of Toronto spring, which means I get up every morning and I really have no idea if it's going to be -8 or +12.
And it will be both those things in the next 2 weeks because welcome to Canada's false spring. We're in false spring now. Like
the boiler in my house for the radiators is confused because it's like -4 overnight, and then it's +2 in the morning, and then it's 9 in the afternoon, and it's like I don't know what I should be doing, and the house is too hot or it's too cold. Anyway, I got no other charming anecdotes. Let's talk. I was actually in a meeting this morning. I mentioned at the top here where we're rolling out a new workflow for the Line podcast. I was in a last-minute meeting this morning talking about all of these things to totally revolutionize the Line podcast experience. When I got a news alert on my phone, it was 11:28 a.m. Eastern Time, and it simply said, Mark Carney sworn in as Prime Minister of Canada. So we will start with generosity. And, I'm already getting shit on Twitter for this, but congratulations to Mark Carney on becoming the Prime Minister of Canada. And I wish him luck and every success for him and his family. I wish them success, happiness, and a good tenure as Prime Minister, because I'm a Canadian and I want my prime ministers to thrive. And I would vote my own conscience, of course, but whoever is the prime minister, I'm always rooting for them. And this seems to be an increasingly controversial statement to make. Fuck you. I make it anyway. Congratulations to Mark Carney and good luck.
So here's a couple of interesting things that I will note even before we get into the cabinet picks, because the cabinet picks are interesting. One is that Mark Carney did his first sort of prime ministerial style campaign stop post his leadership election. And that is, I believe he went to a steel plant in Hamilton. Yeah, Hamilton steel plant. Yes. And many people noticed about how awkward he looked in a hard hat, because of course he looked awkward in a hard hat. I mean,
no one looks good in a hard hat.
No one looks good in a hard hat. And also, if you thought Mark Carney was going to make wearing a hard hat look natural, well, that was probably on an unrealistic standard. But the other thing I did notice is that, like, he did seem to be enjoying himself, if that makes sense. Like, he's still in the honeymoon period, I think, for a politician, where, like, doing a big presser and wearing a funny hat is a bit of a lark for him. And I didn't hate the vibe. I didn't hate the vibe. I didn't get the sense that he was unnatural or forced. I got the sense that he was just like, I'm doing the politician thing now. Neat. I do think that the charm of that does wear off with time, but he kind of has that fresh-eyed, new to the scene kind of vibe going for him, and I don't hate it for him. I don't hate it at all. Nothing really new to announce on policy. Do you want to get into the cabinet picks? They are telling and interesting, I think.
Yeah, can I make an observation point, though, first? Look, we are going to save our comments for Justin Trudeau, his legacy for the next segment. So people who are wondering why we're not barely mentioning the guy's name, don't worry, we've set aside some time for that. But one of the things I find almost incredible, Jen, and don't take this as a criticism because it's just an observation, you just actually reflected in your own comments something that I have noticed as being kind of almost part of the zeitgeist here, which is that the swearing in of Mark Carney, it's kind of a weirdly blah thing. It's like, well,
there's a kind of a weird fake formality to it because, of course, he's prime minister. He's technically prime minister, but he hasn't actually won an election. Oh, by the way, you're hearing my daughter in the background. She is going to make a cameo in her fabulous self. But anyway, she's home from school today. But no, I mean, how should I say this?
I don't think it's that though.
There is something weird about swearing in a prime minister who hasn't actually won an election, even a by-election, in order to win a seat. I know it's bizarre. It's bizarre.
I don't think it's that, and I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm not saying it isn't weird. Like I get it, but the feeling I have isn't, oh man, how weird that he isn't elected. It's more that we have a new prime minister and it doesn't feel like anyone really cares. And, I was talking recently with some friends about the Ontario election we just had, which was, I think I talked about this with you on the podcast, actually. Mm-hmm. It was the weirdest election I ever felt. It was like a Potemkin election. It's like we had an election and no one talked about it and barely anyone showed up. We have a new prime minister. Does anyone care? And this is, for my son, for instance, he's of the age where he has no living memory of anyone other than Justin Trudeau being prime minister. This feels like it should be significant in a way that it isn't. And it could be what you're saying, but is it also just kind of like every other story in the world feels muted in an era where everything pivots on Trump's next tweet?
Yeah, everything is gray.
Yeah.
Everything's gray and sad. I don't know, but I don't care. Let's move on.
Cabinet. Smaller cabinet.
Let's talk about the selection of Mark Carney's chief of staff, obviously the most competent minister in the Liberal caucus. He chose Marco Mendicino. Thank you. Marco Mendicino in order to serve as his chief of staff. I think this was probably Carney's first weird flub as prime minister. Now, we know that this is a temporary role for Mendicino. He is only going to be in that role in a transitional way. But Matt, do you want to share some of the words that we've had to say about Marco Mendicino's political history to date?
He's a liar.
Oh, that.
And this is a minister who got repeatedly caught out saying things that just aren't true. And for any lawyers who are going to object to that, I will simply direct you to the column I wrote where I document at length using Hansard quotations and publicly available statements made by the minister or attributed to him that are at the very least highly cautiously phrased, and in some cases are just inaccurate. And then onto that, we had the issues of what we could politely describe as questionable competence. He was the Minister of Public Safety when Paul Bernardo was transferred controversially, and apparently he had missed the emails. Him and his staff had missed the emails during some of the aftermath of the convoy during the Public Order Emergency Commission. Some of his public statements as a minister, were released, and they were embarrassing. This is a guy who had oversight of the gun file for a while.
Real notable winner for the Liberals. Just high level of execution and competence on the gun file there.
Now, they've come back and taken a few other kicks at the can. We talked about that last week on the podcast, but he was the guy who was the one, I guess is
the poor beaten can.
I'm trying to remember. Was it really 2023? Was it? I mean, time flies when we're having whatever the hell this is. But it was like the Liberals coming out and going, we're banning a bunch of guns, but don't worry, hunters aren't affected. And then it became, well, if we did, well, we didn't mean to, and we're going to fix it. And then that became, we don't know how to fix it, so we're just going to have to ban it. And then it became, okay, we're undoing it. And it became really obvious to me during that process, and this has happened before with other ministers, it became really obvious to me at the process that the minister did not understand his file. And some ministers are very, very good at their files, and some ministers, God bless them, get airdropped into a new role, and they need some time to get up to speed. Like, that happens. I get it. But then you have Minister Mendicino at Public Safety, where you've got a guy who's been in the job long enough to have read his briefing memos and who clearly was in over his head, was eventually dumped from cabinet. And,
on the plus side, it's not like you need to have a chief of staff role really understanding detail-orientated problems
and being good at internal communication.
Being good at internal communication and not lying. It's not like that's a crucial skill set for someone in that role to have. So
I hate
sure
political nicknames. I hate them. But Mendacious Mendicino was pretty good. And I didn't come up with it, but someone else came up with it. And the funny thing about putting in Mendicino as chief of staff, and you're right, it's probably temporary, is that
it is, yes.
Marco had been very obviously setting himself up for a Toronto political run. So you've got to you might have deleted it now, but like his Twitter in the last few weeks has been hilarious. Pictures of him with a shovel clearing sidewalks, complaining about how snow removal has gone to hell in Olivia Chow's Toronto. And there were other examples of this, but really hyper-focused Toronto content. Olivia Chow's let this city go to hell. Someone's got to fix it. Obviously setting up some kind of municipal run, whether as mayor or as councillor, I don't know. The guy who 2 weeks ago was out there with a toque and a shovel taking pot shots at the mayor of Canada's largest city is now the chief of staff to the prime minister.
Anyway, I'm sure that's fine.
What?
Look, I think Mendicino will probably make that mayoral run. I just think this is a transition role, but it's just of all the people to put in that role, why him was a little bit odd. But I want to move on to the other cabinet. Even the Liberals were like, what? Yeah, I mean, anyway, I do want to move on to the other cabinet picks because there's some interesting stuff there that's worth diving into.
Yeah, small cabinet.
Smaller cabinet, good. That needs to happen. That's needed to happen for a very long time. Dominic LeBlanc, Minister of International Trade and Intergovernmental Affairs. So LeBlanc is still pretty high. I think he's rightly noted as a Trudeau ride or die. So that's one of Trudeau's people still there. Mm-hmm. Melanie Joly, still Minister of Foreign Affairs. I mean, we've had some harsh words from Miss Joly, but I can also understand. But I can also understand wanting to keep the foreign contacts the same. Champagne, Minister of Finance. Interesting. Anita Anand, Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. She is, I think, perceived to be among the more competent in the senior cabinet kind of.
It was
roles.
A weird one for me.
That was a bit of that's underutilizing her. I want Anand and Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you. Bill Blair, Minister of National. Back in Defense. Patty Hadju. Minister of Indigenous Services. Wilkinson, again, one of the more competent ones. He's staying at Minister of Energy and National Resources. That makes sense for him. I'm not going to go over all of them. The interesting one is Guilbeault. Guilbeault has not been yeeted. That's a choice. Freeland. Yeah. Well, at least he can do not so much damage, except to people like us.
Yeah, Stephen Guilbeault is going to bring that Stephen Guilbeault proficiency over to rebooting the CBC. Have fun.
Fantastic. Well done. Freeland, Minister of Transport and Internal Trade. So the transport one's
another interesting one.
Well, it's kind of a demotion, but internal trade is going to be a really significant file for Canada over the next few years. I mean, not that we are assuming that this cabinet is going to remain this way, because we're probably going to go into an election pretty closely. But internal trade is actually going to be a pretty important one. And then I'm scrolling through here. What's the other one worth noting? There's a lot of new names here. So that's David J. McGinty.
Not a ton of new names, right? Like, I mean, some, but not a ton. Nate is still at housing.
Still at
okay.
housing. Anyway, so
McGinty's still at public safety. Overall, I would say a fair bit of continuity from one cabinet to the next, even though they've chopped it in about half.
Yeah, they say that's about right. So anyway, I mean, look, even if Carney drops the writ almost imminently, which is kind of what everybody's expecting, it's the rumor. What I think is interesting about that is that he's giving people a sense of what a Carney even if he doesn't drop the writ, he's got a cabinet here, but he's also giving signals about what he's valuing in a cabinet ahead of an election. So I can understand if you're going to do a swearing-in ceremony for him at the Gigi's house, why you would want to swear in a new cabinet under you as well. So, like, again, interesting. There's an interesting continuity between old and new there. The fact that the cabinet is much leaner is also an interesting choice as well. Do we want to talk about polls, about how Canadians seem to be responding to all this?
We do, but let me make one point on the cabinet that is meta level first. I think we can already see, and this is going to be germane to what we're going to talk about in the polls in a minute, we are seeing already through Carney, and look, Mendocino as chief of staff is a bad call. Jolie staying at foreign affairs is a bad call. Unless Anand is going to get some other element of her portfolio. Like, for instance, we don't have a deputy prime minister being named yet. Maybe that will be her. Underutilizing her, I think, is a bad call. But overall, we can draw one conclusion from what Carney's been saying and what he's been doing. And I'm not saying any of this is sincere. I'm not here judging the man's character. But as a matter of political positioning, he's moving the Liberals to the right.
Oh, absolutely.
Smaller cabinet, cutting the consumer-facing carbon tax. And I know people think that's bullshit, but it's still an interesting statement. Talking about productivity and wasteful spending in Ottawa, saying that the economy is underperformed. Look, again, I'm not vouching for the guy's sincerity here, and I have no idea what the Liberal campaign is going to be. It's interesting to me to see a cabinet that has a lot of continuity with Justin Trudeau for a prime minister who is signaling pretty strongly a significant break from Justin Trudeau. Like, Trudeau has been, and again, no judgment here, but Trudeau over his 10 years took the Liberals, moved them to the left, drove the NDP kind of away from the center, and that was where Justin Trudeau positioned his Liberal Party. Sorry, my sump pump is running constantly. I apologize for that. It's just that time of the year. Mark Carney is keeping the cabinet, but also moving the party to the right. And I just find that interesting. You mentioned polls a minute ago. Seems to be working. Now, I do think Carney's poll numbers right now are artificially high. It's getting a ton of attention.
Hold on, because there's one thing that I wanted to say just further to that before we get into the polls, now that you've brought it up. We talked about this back on Monday. One of the segments that I wrote in response to Carney's, thank you very much speech, acceptance speech, was, yes, it's very obvious that the Liberals are making that shift back into a center, not conservative position, but they're retaking the center position. I think what's really funny to me here is that one of the giant fights that have been playing out internally in conservative politics is this idea that, we need to win by not pretending to be liberals. We need to win by being conservative. We need to be unapologetically right-wing conservative, not only ideologically right-wing, but also culturally right-wing. There needs to be a voice that speaks for the cultural right-wing in Canada. And I think that to some extent, the Conservative Party is as much a culturally conservative party as it is an ideologically conservative party. So part of the reason why the Conservative Party has undergone that 10-year internal fight has been over that issue. And it's why you're seeing so much viciousness now being directed at Aaron O'Toole. Because Aaron O'Toole was considered to be the guy who was staking we're going to win by taking these moderate sort of liberal liberal, slightly more conservative but liberal positions, and we're going to win by showing Canadians that we are sort of these moderate, conservative, trustworthy type conservatives. And that didn't work. O'Toole lost, didn't make any gains from the previous election, and that sort of seemed to break the spell of that particular faction and that particular wing, which is why we saw this ascendancy from Pierre Poilievre. And Pierre Poilievre is very much the king of the, nah, fuck it, we're going to be unapologetic in what our conservative values are, and unapologetic, and we're not going to try and pander to the center by pretending to be, blue liberals. Screw the liberals. We're not liberals. We're conservatives, whatever. And for several years, that whole internal fight has played out to the conservatives' benefit, because it's played out to this, this strong culturally conservative base that's coming up as people just got really, really tired of the hard left progressive side of the liberals, right? But while the conservatives are busy sort of litigating that old fight and litigating that old internal tension, what's happening is that the liberals are now coming up right from behind them and taking that Aaron O'Toole position out from them. They're saying, no, we're going to win by being liberals, right? But not left progressive liberals. We're going to win by sort of restaking that old Chrétien Martin sort of ground of socially progressive, fiscally responsible liberals. Now, whether or not that is actually what the Carney is going to do is a whole other debate. We're talking about optics and perception, not reality. But Carney is positioning himself as these fiscally responsible. We're going to focus on productivity, innovation. We're going to build. We're going to do all these things. So, the conservatives might find that now that the liberals have vacated that far left role, their far right position starts to become increasingly untenable for them. And that is where we get in, where I think is a good transition to get into the polling numbers, because the polling numbers are, if you're a conservative, getting real scary.
Yeah, they are. And I think I'm glad you mentioned whoops, my knapsack just fell over from across the room. Ghost in the basement is pissed off about the sump pump. One of the things that's happening politically is very quick changes. And you just laid out changes on the timescale of a decade, right? Like the 2015 election, you had Liberals running to the left, Mulcair taking the NDP to the center, and the Conservatives were exhausted. And then we had the 2019 election, which, to be honest, was kind of weird. Even with hindsight, I don't even know how I would summarize whatever the fuck the 2019 election was about, except apparently Andrew Scheer lying about his American citizen resume and
somehow this
Justin
better
Trudeau
more
having
than Justin Trudeau blackface.
Yeah. And then the 2021 election ended up being post-COVID, but also, Aaron O'Toole going centrist, no wait, true blue, no wait, centrist, and then the Liberals going hyper voter efficiency, and then Jagmeet Singh was just happy to be invited. And now we're coming up to this new election where I think you've nailed it quite right. The NDP has been completely useless, marginalized in recent years. Yeah. I don't know what the fuck they're doing. We've got liberals being liberals again, and we've got conservatives having kind of opened up a significant part of that spectrum to the liberals to come back. And I think it's fascinating here. You mentioned the polls. The one, so I'm not going to name them all here, but there's a lot of polling companies in Canada, but there's a small handful of them I take seriously. And I kind of consider them my gold standard. And my gold standard in recent weeks has been split, which was very upsetting for me because I didn't know what to draw from that. Some of them showed the Liberals pulling into a much closer position, even a lead. Others showed the Conservatives maintaining a large lead. There's been real consolidation now. I don't know who's in the lead, but the Liberals are competitive again, and they might be in a position to win. And I think to the point,
which is not what you and I would have predicted a couple of weeks ago, and I think we need to acknowledge that we were wrong there. I did not think that was a plausible scenario. I
still think Carney's at an artificial high. But the fact of the matter is, if he can call an election soon enough, an artificial high can get you across the finish line.
Yeah, I think that's right. I still stand by my position that, look, the scope of the lead that the Conservatives had going into this was so significant that Carney would have to be more than merely adequate or even good in order to run up that gap. He would have had to have been a once-in-a-century style leader and campaigner in order to manage that. He might be the once-in-a-century leader. I don't know what the evidence is that he's the once-in-a-century style campaigner, and you need both in that role. He hasn't totally flubbed it. I think he's made some weird choices, but he hasn't totally flubbed it. I don't think that he's been strong on policy, which I think is one of the strengths that he should be bringing into an election campaign. And I think that, campaigns matter. Campaigns matter a lot. And he's coming into a campaign at a significant disadvantage because he's surrounded by an exhausted team. He's still probably behind in the longer term polls. And he's untested and untried in a campaign. Pierre is none of these things, and the conservatives are none of these things. So that's interesting. But here's the thing that I would say is that I don't think Mark Carney has demonstrated himself to be like the once-in-a-generation talent. But holy shit, are the conservatives flubbing this hard and fast. Mm-hmm. Conservatives might give this to him. And that is probably something that I did not predict as being possible a couple of months ago.
There are three structural forces all happening right now, which is why the polls are weird. And this is why I still think Carney's at an artificial sugar high right now. But there are three structural things happening all at once. One, Justin Trudeau was deeply personally unpopular and was obviously an anchor on the Liberal generic vote. Mark Carney doesn't have that problem. We're going to find out where his natural resting level is. It's obvious it's higher than where Trudeau's was. Number two, we have the fact that right now Mark Carney is at the very best possible place in his public profile. Maximum visibility, zero mistakes yet. And I think to your point a minute ago, he's made some weird decisions, but this is inside baseball micro politics. Like no one really cares about Marco Mendocino being the chief of staff, except weirdos like us. But that's over now. You mentioned the Hamilton steel plant appearance. What I noticed about that is he's still dodging reporters.
Yes.
He can't do that forever.
He can't do that forever.
So we're going to find out. I think Jen's phrased it well here. Is he competent, better than competent, or less than competent? So that's a structural thing that's happening right now. The third structural thing is what Jen has alluded to here, which is how the Conservatives have positioned themselves, and they've positioned themselves badly. And I think we're looking at a combination of politics and personality here. The political environment has turned against the Conservatives, and that's fine. It happens. They should be able to adapt to that, but they're going to have to make decisions they don't want to make. And I was thinking this week, kind of as I was waiting for all of Friday's events to happen, I was thinking of something I wrote years ago. It's about 3 years ago now, and I wrote it after Aaron O'Toole got purged as leader of the Conservatives. And I did a series of interviews where I spoke with people who were very close to Aaron O'Toole, and also people who weren't close to Aaron O'Toole, people who were just sort of party stalwarts, right? And one of them, who I'm obviously not going to name, had a very specific observation about Poilievre and the Poilievre people. And this individual, who was not an O'Toole guy or girl, I'm being gender neutral here, but this individual had said, they don't just want to win, meaning Poilievre's people. They want to win a specific way. And political operatives normally are actually pretty amoral about this stuff. Like, they just want to win. Like, they will take the path to power. The Poilievre guys, I was told, aren't like that, because they're not just trying to win to win. They're trying to win to settle an internal Conservative Party divide. And Jen has been talking about this a minute ago, about the O'Toole guys were, hey, we're gonna lean into the center to try and poach those votes. There were Conservatives who always thought that was the wrong move. And that is basically the Poilievre faction. And they want to win and win big, fighting a campaign their way, not only to win, but to prove that it was possible to win that way. And I think what we're seeing now is, if the Conservatives were, in a weird way, a little bit more ruthlessly immoral, they would probably be better able to go, Trump is a wild card, Carney is a wild card, cost of living, which has been the top issue for 3 years, isn't the top issue anymore, and that's our strongest issue. If the Conservatives are equally as good as the Liberals on standing up to Trump, they're going to win. If the Liberals are better at standing up to Trump, I don't know if the Conservatives are going to win. But the problem is, in order for the Conservatives to get this, they're going to have to give up on something that is very near and dear to their hearts, very precious to them. They're going to have to give up on the idea of winning the campaign the way they wanted to. they might have to just settle for winning it. And I don't know if they're able to do that. Psychologically, I don't know if they can do that.
And this is where I think my analysis went faulty. I didn't consider the possibility that these guys would be so wrapped up on winning their own internal bullshit that they would lose the election on it. I did not consider that as a possibility, and that's where my analysis, I think, on this failed. Presuming our analysis here is correct. But I mean, I want to talk a little bit about some interesting things that I've noticed in the last 2 weeks or so. And this particularly came out after our last week's sort of rant against MAGA land, is that we got a lot of interesting comments from people who I think were kind of soft pro-MAGA. And that is, they weren't necessarily completely on board the Trump culty thing, but they liked what Trump's election signaled about where the culture was going, and they liked where they liked who Trump pissed off. You know, they were on board of this, and I'm talking specifically about Canadian conservatives.
It was a data point proving that the culture war was swinging their way.
Yeah, this culture war was doing, and they got really emotionally wrapped up in like being on this team, right up until the moment when MAGA land turned on them. And rather than say, oh, shoot, we backed the wrong horse here, this was bad for us personally, instead they're coming back and saying, la 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 la, la 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 la, I really don't want you talking about Trump anymore. Why can't we focus on Canada's problems? We need to focus on Canada's problems, la 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 la. And that, I think, is basically the conservative movement wrapped up in a nutshell here. Because that's what I'm getting from Pierre. It's like, rather than like, I don't want to give Trump the time of day. Let's just focus on axe the tax, build the homes, stop the crime, focus on Canada's problems. Yeah. And I don't know how to scream this into the abyss loud enough. That's not going to work. And the reason why that's not going to work, outside of a very narrow section of people who are going through an emotional process as a result of their own support of Donald Trump right now, the reason why that's not going to work is because you can't avoid the cost of living issue without talking about Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. Right now, you can't. You can't avoid talking about Canada's own strength, insecurity, problems, and sclerosis unless it's tied to how that's all affected by Donald Trump. Like, we can't, like, the American situation is so intrinsically tied to our situation politically and economically that you can't just excise the parts that you want to talk about and avoid. It's like trying to talk about the problems of Canada with an 800-pound gorilla in the room. Yeah. And I don't necessarily think that the Conservatives and Pierre. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't think necessarily that I give Pierre Poilievre and the people around him more credit than to assume that they're like devotees of Donald Trump. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's a correct read of the guy, and I don't think it's a correct read of where the Conservative movement's at right now. I really don't. I don't think a bulk of Canada's Conservative movement is like true blue MAGA. I think that their attachment to MAGA was more of an emotional attachment to what he culturally represented than it was to any kind of ideological attachment to himself personally or what he hoped to do. Mm-hmm. Or maybe that's me giving them too much credit, but I genuinely believe that.
Me too.
But
more or less.
And I don't think that Pierre is a doe-eyed MAGA-hatted lunatic. I just don't. That's not plausible to me. But what I do think is that these guys are scared of how their base feels about Donald Trump right now. I do think they are sort of nervous about that. I think they've been reluctant to pivot for their own emotional reasons. And it's not to say that they haven't pivoted. Way. And they want to win it their way. And like, I do think that there's how to say this? There has been some pivot. You and I both acknowledged here and in the dispatch that there has been some movement. There's been more Canada First vibe. There's been more of that. But then it's always more Canada First vibe. Oh, and then that sneaky Mark Carney wants to bring in the carbon tax again.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So
right?
I think...
And it's like the tone is wrong. The tone is just completely off. And if these guys go into a campaign trying to win this on like Mark Carney is Justin Trudeau version 2 and he's going to bring back the carbon tax, you're going to get steamrollered.
You know what's happening? And I think that's correct. Yes. And I think what they're trying to do, they have Poilievre and the people around Poilievre have figured out that they've got a Trump problem. They get it, but they're not responding to it correctly. So what they're trying to do is go, okay, we're going to keep the campaign we've been planning on running, the rock-ribbed, true blue cost of living campaign, but we're going to bolt onto it a couple of things to handle Trump. So it's going to be sneaky Carney and his carbon tax, true blue cost of living. We're going to build the homes, combined with some public safety stuff, stop the crime, get rid of needle exchanges, things like that, or not needle exchanges, the safe supply. But we're going to gussy it up by also having a speech about Canada first. And we're going to have Pierre make a statement where he says, Canada will never be the 51st state. And they keep kind of presenting it to the public and to the media and going, see, we did it.
Yeah, we did the token anti-Trump thing. What's the problem?
Back to axe the tax. What I think some of them are figuring out, some of the people around Poilievre are figuring out that ain't going to cut it. Not enough of them have figured out. And frankly, to my understanding, Poilievre is not an easy guy to advise. So even if there was a chorus that was literally just playing the last 60 seconds of this podcast on a loop for him, unless he decides to change his strategy, the strategy isn't going to change here. This is why I said a minute ago, this is politics, but it's also personality. It's also psychology.
They're going to come back and be like, yeah, but Matt Gurney and Jen Gerson were wrong about O'Toole.
They're paid media
They're
blah, blah,
mainstream media hacks. And they're going to come back and they're going to say, yeah, they didn't predict that the polls were going to shift as dramatically as they've shifted. And I'm just like, no, we did not predict that you could fuck this up that badly. I thought that you were way more competent than you turned out to be. Congratulations. You've made both of us look like asses now. Thanks, guys. But, I don't know how to describe this, but Donald Trump represents an existential threat to the country. We are facing an economic war. We need a wartime leader. That's the mentality.
And Carney's talking like one more than Poilievre is.
Carney is talking like one. Carney's talking like the guy who understands what the ballot question is going to be, and Poilievre is not. And, I think that Poilievre absolutely has it in him to be the wartime leader. I think Poilievre has an absolute good shot. He can position himself as a strong, fuck you, Donald Trump advocate. I'm going to put Canada first. I'm going to be, whatever. He can be that guy. I think that he could be, grab the apple, Donald Trump. But the fact that Poilievre trades in contempt, willfully, openly, happily, gleefully, for every single person except Donald Trump
is a problem.
I don't mind it that he demonstrates contempt for me. I don't mind that he demonstrates contempt for my colleagues. I don't mind that he demonstrates contempt for the CBC. That's fine. Whatever. But can we see just a tenth of that toward the guy who's threatening our sovereignty, you think?
I don't know.
Any moment now.
You know what?
That'd be great.
Honestly, shout out to the Poilievre advisors who I know for a fact listen to this podcast. I know you guys are trying. I get it. But I'm just going to lay this to you in the bluntest terms I can. And I think we'll probably drop a like and subscribe here because we've been going on for a while. You can win a campaign that is all about defending Canada, standing up for Canada, and as Jen said so perfectly a minute ago, munching apples at Donald Trump's expense. You can win that campaign. You got a good team, you got good databases, you've got money. You can win that campaign. And if you can negate the Liberal apparent advantage on that front, then the other things that you're good at, because you're better at cost of living, you're better at small government, you're better at economics, or at least equal to Carney. We'll see how that shakes out. You're certainly better on crime and public safety. But you got to understand that your strengths are now your secondary assets. What you've got to do is make your primary campaign to not fall behind the Liberals on channeling this nascent moment of Canadian patriotism. If you try to run the campaign you want to run, if you try to run the campaign you thought you were going to run for 3 years, if you try to run the campaign Poilievre still clearly wants to run, Carney has a very good chance of beating you. And none of you are going to survive in your jobs if that happens. You will be run out of town on a rail if that happens. You might be about to be the next Aaron O'Toole, guys. Don't do that.
Unless, of course, Carney really does screw the dog in the campaign, in which case, but to the conservative people you're talking to, you don't control that. So
Imagine,
You know?
and just in case Aaron hears this, Aaron, I love you, buddy, but like the people who purged you seem to be about to repeat your defeat. And that would, I mean, for Aaron, that would probably be deeply funny. But for the people who actually purged Aaron, guys, can you feel it happening to you right now? Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
For hundreds of communities across Canada, forestry is a lifeline, supporting 200,000 workers, $87 billion in annual revenues, and $37 billion in exports, $29 billion to the United States. But it's more than just a driver of our economy. It's key to addressing some of our biggest challenges. We need an action plan for our forest sector and its employees, one that will help build the homes we need with Canadian wood, reduce the risk of wildfires, and create more family-supporting jobs right here at home. To learn more about what forestry can do for Canada, visit forestryforthefuture.ca. We basically didn't mention his name, Jen. Hardly a mention of Justin Trudeau in the first segment. A couple of them where it was necessary.
We still will put him in the headline for the SEO potential, though. So.
Yeah, we sure will.
We'll ride that pony as long as we possibly can.
Oh boy! If we could title every podcast "Carbon Tax Trudeau," we would be retired millionaires by now.
Goodbye, Carbon Tax Trudeau.
Yeah, nailed it. It's interesting, and I'm in a thoughtful place, which will either make for excellent podcast content or terrible podcast content. I think every outgoing leader needs a cooling off period. And I think that means probably for their own health, like hit a beach, turn your phone off, go for a walk. Like Justin Trudeau, the best thing Justin Trudeau can do for himself, and I'm sure he has people telling him this, is just go away. And I don't mean this because I hate the guy or anything. I mean for his sake, rent a villa somewhere in a country where no one's ever heard of Canada. Take long walks down the beach at night, eat delicious food, rediscover your hobbies, spend some time with your kids, and decompress for a couple of months. And I hope he has people around him who are going to help him do that. And while he's doing that, you and I and others, Jen, we have the job of figuring out what the fuck his legacy is going to be.
What just happened?
10 years.
What just happened to us?
Yeah. And I think in a panel discussion I did with Susan Delacour, we did it for the Toronto Star. We were talking about this, and I was trying to be as fair as I could to Justin Trudeau. Some of the policy stuff he did is going to help hold up well. And I also think it's interesting because there's been some polls about this. What was Justin Trudeau's top achievement and things like that? And the polls have all kind of clustered around them, and they're all consistent. He, generally speaking, gets high marks for emergency pandemic era financial supports to either individuals or businesses. Yep.
That was, and also logistically, that was challenging.
No, and I think that's correct. Vaccine procurement is something he gets credit for, and again, I'm going to give him that.
Sure.
Cannabis legalization.
Yep.
Dental care and child care. Yeah.
I think there are a lot of people who have more of an ideal about
what
the
those
child
are.
Care program than actual firsthand experience.
People who are not navigating the system love the idea of it. People who are.
and let me tell you, have a frank conversation with any working mom right now. Childcare has become more difficult to obtain, but cheaper. So, and if you talk to anybody who actually does childcare, the new system is a bit of a nightmare. So, yeah, people are much more attached to the idea of childcare than the actual functioning rollout of it. This has not been top marks on deliverology. I'll just put it that way. But this is also something that I was screaming about in the last election. I was like, because I do think that the childcare promise in the last election is what salvaged the Liberal minority.
Oh, plus being good at politics.
Yeah, well, that too. But that was the policy that people were like, well, finally we'll bring in childcare. And I'm like, I was warning people. I was like, guys, this is not going to be what you think it is. This is not going to be some miraculous $10 a day childcare that's going to completely revolutionize the lives of working women in the country.
Our buddy,
and I would say that prediction's held up.
Oh, Raheem Mohammed, our buddy, he's at the National Post now. He wrote a great piece for us where he analyzed the Quebec provincial childcare program. He said the federal program is going to scale this up and repeat all the same advantages and all the same errors.
all the same
It's going to
errors.
work incredibly well for the people who get into it. And the people who get into it are going to be the high social capital people who have time to navigate the bureaucracy.
Yes.
So the wealthy and well-connected are going to have subsidized $10 a day childcare. The poor single mom who doesn't have the time to do it is not.
Yes, and the other thing that I would say, just as someone who personally navigates the system,
Yeah, my kids were too old. I missed it.
Yeah, what happened to me in the system was I went from a position in a place like Calgary where we had more opportunities, where it was actually reasonably easy to find daycare. It was just expensive. Not $5,000 a month, but it still made more sense for me to work, but it was pricey, but you could find a space. And what happened to me this year, when especially trying to navigate this with a 5-year-old, there were no spaces anywhere. I could not find aftercare, childcare for my child at any price anywhere. And I had to actually take her out of school and put her half-day kindergarten program and put her into a full-time program at my expense because I could not find aftercare childcare for her. It was not available. Nowhere, anywhere in my neighborhood had this. And that was a pretty significant shift from my experience in the system 2 or 3 years prior. So we did find a place for her way out in a different community, way out in a different neighborhood. It was a full-time program. I had to take her out of school to get it. Is it affordable? Yes, it is affordable. But, okay, great. You're subsidizing me. You've given me more affordable childcare that is way, way harder to find.
I think the bigger picture part of all this, though, is I thought those polls were interesting because one of the polling companies, Polera, not only polled on what Justin Trudeau's most approved of accomplishments were, they also broke that down by partisan affiliation. So I thought it was really interesting because the broader public plus liberals agreed on the top 5. The order changed a bit. Mm-hmm. But they agreed on the top 5 things. And what I said to Susan in the Star was that if you look at what even liberals have identified as Justin Trudeau's top accomplishments, and then you look at the headlines today, what you're actually seeing is proof that this government was wildly out of step with the times. And, cannabis legalization, I'm going to spot them that because that was very early in the mandate and that was the good times. That was the nice era. I don't think it went perfectly for them, but I think in 2015...
The country is better off for having that legalized.
Yeah, and in 2015, you could make the case that was actually worth investing some capital in. What I said to Susan last week, though, is open the newspaper, look at the front page. Trump threatening to invade Panama. Portugal canceling F-35 contract because the United States is no longer a reliable ally. China, with its Twitter account, is threatening war with America. The French are proposing turning their nuclear arsenal into a continental security shield. And the Poles, on top of creating a 500,000-man reserve army with mandatory training for high school graduates, is also talking about developing a nuclear deterrent. And in Canada, dental care. And I'm not saying...
And it's actually kind of a half-assed dental care program that only certain people with certain income brackets can sort of access.
And I'm not saying it's bad that poor people and old people are having subsidized dental care. I'm saying that maybe wasn't the top national priority we should have been focused on in recent years. And in an ideal world, you'd have a government that could walk and chew gum at the same time, that could rearm the country, modernize our defenses, complete an east-to-west natural gas and oil pipeline, tear down interprovincial trade barriers, and roll out a dental care program. The country and government we've actually had for the last 10 years is the one where dental care was somewhat beyond their ability, so we only got half of it here.
Well, and the other thing I would say is this is one thing that frustrates me about the Conservatives and their inability to pivot, because the line is right here, and that is the last 10 years of the Liberal government have left Canada fundamentally ill-prepared to handle the world as it's changing, or the world as it's become. And I think that is an incontrovertibly true point. We're economically less innovative. Our immigration system and our immigration consensus has cracked, and our immigration system has become a major problem.
Oh, we talked cabinet earlier. Miller out.
Oh, that is interesting. And also, our innovation and productivity have tanked. Our interprovincial trade and interprovincial just relationships and bitterness are like at an all-time high, and that I think I trace a lot of that directly to federal fuck-ups and just an inability to manage its files and take control over stuff that was its direct responsibility, particularly infrastructure and pipeline infrastructure. That's left a real lingering sore spot that could prove to be a fatal national weakness. And our military, we've damaged our relationships with all of our allies. Again, I will point this out. It's real telling to me that none of our international allies are saying boo about Donald Trump's frequent attacks on our sovereignty. That's a woohoo, guys.
Well, we did get the king to put on a Canadian uniform, so thank you.
Great, thanks. Better than nothing. We appreciate that, King Charles. But just the abject silence from people who are supposed to be our allies in this front is very, very concerning and ought to be. And just the national defense file. I mean, I don't actually fully blame Justin Trudeau for this. I mean, the national defense has been under prioritized for decades. This goes way beyond Trudeau. But he certainly continued took a bad situation and allowed it to free fall into something catastrophic, which is where I think we are now. And this is the thing that I would just point out is after 10 years under a Liberal government, we're less economically resilient, we're less united, we have less of a national narrative and a national unity, and we're militarily less
and economically
capable, and economically less capable of dealing with Donald Trump and dealing with the world as it's becoming. And that is on them. That is on Trudeau. That is on the Liberals. I think they actually deserve to lose the next election for that.
I was thinking about, because this is the way my mind works, all you podcast viewers and listeners, you get to take a tour through my neurons right now. You're going to love it. I was thinking about the Munich conference, where the French and the British sold out the Czechoslovakians at the time to Germany, gave up the Sudetenland. And Prime Minister Chamberlain of Great Britain has not fared well historically for that, but there is an interesting wrinkle to it, which is the time between when the British and the French sold out the Czechoslovakians, bought the Royal Air Force time to build more Hurricane fighters and to develop the Spitfire fighter and get it into service, which then became pivotal to winning the Battle of Britain. And I'm thinking, if we took Canadian Munich, right, and we made it Donald Trump's election in 2016, we make it the convoy, we make it the pandemic, whatever. Instead of building Hurricanes and rushing development of the Spitfire, Justin Trudeau would have focused harder on paying for contraceptives and insulin, rolling out a school food program, and launching a 5-year study for high-speed rail. And the only thing that has even partially salvaged Chamberlain's historical reputation is that he bought Britain time. He sold out the Czechoslovakians, but he bought Britain time to be ready to win the air war to come. What did Justin Trudeau accomplish for the last 4 years?
Yeah.
And politics is so personal these days, where, when I said, I put out some tweet yesterday, which was basically, I wish Justin Trudeau and his family happiness in his post-political life. The backlash, I'm not going to tell you it was unexpected. It was exactly what I expected. And to me, it was a useful sorting exercise because I got to block about 100 idiots. But everybody wants to know how you feel about a politician. I don't really feel anything toward Justin Trudeau. I don't have feelings. I mean, to the extent I have...
You could just end the sentence there. I don't have feelings.
I have some feelings, but to the extent I have any feelings about Justin Trudeau, I think I recognize in a weird way a kindred spirit. I, too, am a sci-fi nerd who is a deeply private introvert who stupidly chose a job that forces me to act like an extrovert. I kind of get that. But that doesn't... I don't have any personal dislike for Justin Trudeau. I also don't have any particular personal affection for him. I'm just trying to call balls and strikes here. In his first term as a majority prime minister, he had some genuine successes. But then the world went weird on him. And instead of building...
he was never able to pivot.
And instead of building Spitfires, he kept saying, look at the 2015 playbook. It's like, well, what should we finish here? Like, what is the next...
It was a tripling down on ever more Picayune entitlements.
On the Sunny Ways playbook that was obsolete. And it's not their fault. I don't blame Justin Trudeau or the Liberals or Freeland or whomever. I don't blame them for what has happened to the world.
No.
I blame them for not building Spitfires. And you took the words right out of my mouth. We were beating up on Pierre Poilievre in the last segment here about how he can't pivot. He hasn't been able to pivot in about 3 months, realistically here. Like, kind of, Freeland put the knife into Trudeau in December. So it's been about 3 months. Poilievre might be about to blow an election and be, like I said, chased out of Conservativeville with pitchforks because he couldn't pivot in 3 months. Trudeau had, depending on how you want to define this, anywhere from 8 to 3 years. I don't know what future historians are going to settle on his legacy being. I think that depends a little bit on what the fuck happens historically.
Yeah, and I don't buy, and I also don't buy the whole argument that, well, no one could have predicted. It's like, you and I have been talking about what was happening with the changes of the world since like 2018, maybe 2019 at the outside. I mean, this was not ragingly, like, we're not geniuses and we're not known for making like super accurate predictions necessarily. Like, you did not have to be a super like advanced futurist prognosticator to be able to see after 2016 in the election of Donald Trump #1 that something was happening in America and we were going to get sideswiped by it, and it was time for us to start thinking about the future. But again, this was a Liberal government led by Trudeau, I think, that had no tricks up its sleeve than just, well, more entitlements will be more Tommy Douglas than Tommy Douglas. And at a certain point, you have to start defining a nation by something more than its entitlements. At a certain point, that's not a nation anymore. That's a dependency. That's a country club. You know,
it's a Costco membership.
It's a Costco membership. That's right. That's not a that's look at what you get coming to Canada. You get an amazing healthcare program and a major blah, blah. It's like I'm not necessarily
a hot
opposed
dog
to
and
those,
a fountain drink for $1.50.
Yeah, like I'm not necessarily opposed to having these entitlements where they make sense as a policy form, but how should I say this? Like, you can't build a national identity against assuming your own moral superiority because you're smug and smarmy enough to acknowledge that you decided to give yourself more benefits than the other guy, which is kind of what we've done. We've built an entire national identity that was sort of, at one hand, self-abnegating. So, we're a monster colonial genocidal state, but we're so much better than everyone else because we have a healthcare system that's increasingly shit. Okay, so you're defining the positive aspects of your national identity around the fact that you've given yourself more entitlements. And that's it. More entitlements that you're really just forcing other people to pay more for. Really, overwhelmingly. Or yourselves. You know, it's I'm not going to get into tax policy here. But yeah, well, how about we avoid that? How about we we'll avoid how we get into how we distribute, revenues and tax policies for a moment. Let's not.
Yeah, I'll take this back to the safe ground of the scintillating discussion of the Munich conference.
Go. Anyway, look, as I said, this is sort of the only way that the Liberals knew how to define their legacy and define themselves was trying to reach for ever higher fruit on the tree of things that they could give Canadians back through the tax dollars that they took out of the economy. It's just, I know, we'll just give you another thing, a dental care, a pharmacare, a child care, or another thing. It was like, we all pay for that, by the way. That's not free.
We'll announce another gun ban, but then further delay the implementation. Yeah. We're going to continually announce, and we'll demand full credit for the announcement, and we'll be very offended when anyone points out we haven't done the thing. 9 years of looking at a high-speed rail program, and the final announcement, which now lands in Chrystia Freeland's lap, so have fun with that one, Minister, is after 9 years of work We are prepared to launch a 5-year study.
The first high-speed rail was first proposed back in '84, man. It's as old as I am at this point, and I ain't young.
You said a minute ago that there's the history of making predictions, right? And you said you didn't have to be brilliant at making predictions here. One of the most vicious metrics that you can judge the Trudeau government, and probably not as a man, but you can judge Justin Trudeau as a prime minister, is look at the things he was saying and compare them to the things that he did. And I don't even mean the hypocrisy, although there were obviously
there were some clangers,
moments of political. There were some clangers, that's true, but I think the bigger problem here was the delta, where there were promises made and achievements. And if you'd filled that gap with building more Hurricane squadrons, we'd be in better shape today, but we didn't. And I don't know, and I said a minute ago, right, politics is so personal right now. And I don't have rose-colored glasses. Like, I'm not trying to say that, 50 years ago, politics was a purely rational decision. No, of course not. There's always personalities. I get it. One of the things, I don't know if we have time to fully explore this today, but one of the things that I think is interesting, and when you consider not the legacy of Justin Trudeau, but his time in office, he was our first real social media era prime minister. And Twitter was around for Stephen Harper and Facebook around, like, I get that. But he was the first prime minister who I think really mastered social media.
But the social media of 2015.
Well, that's exactly it. And then kept trying the same old tricks, with
those are the weirdest
Bill
shit
Morneau
ever.
ads. Yeah. And I think that's it, right? And look at what Justin Trudeau has been saying about the rules-based international order for the last, since the invasion of Ukraine. Look at what Chrystia Freeland is saying. And you and I have gone out of our way to praise Chrystia Freeland, overlook the Disney Plus thing, more or less, and talk about her speech at the Brookings Institution, which I went back and read again recently. Yeah. And it's a good speech. Where are my fucking Spitfires? Why not just make an
ammunition factory? We could be supplying them by now. Anyway, look, I don't want to overstate this. I also want to get into the news a little bit because there was an interesting piece this week. Last week there was a piece that came out by Sam Cooper at the Bureau, and also it was kind of followed up by the Globe and Mail, that found that in the early era of Justin Trudeau's tenure, somewhere between 2015 and 2017, Justin Trudeau appears to have met with someone called Paul King-Jin, who was later found to be allegedly implicated in a lot of Chinese organized crime and money laundering in British Columbia. I think that this is a really newsworthy thing to note. And to me, it furthers a narrative, or I think a demonstrably true narrative of Justin Trudeau showing very poor judgment around anything China related in that 2015 to 2017 era. Of course, this, remember, will be the era when we know that Beijing tried to put $1 million into the Trudeau Foundation via a kind of billionaire Chinese proxy whom Justin Trudeau would later meet at a fundraiser in his honor in a Toronto home. So, like, we already know that there is that for, I think, a lot of interesting historical and political reasons.
Yeah. Well, and who among us?
We already know that there is a history of poor judgment from Justin Trudeau in that era. I think that it's also important for us to note that in that era, we were also, as a country, trying to build more ties with China generally, that was also Harper's position. This was before, I think, that there was an international realization that China was not going to liberalize, and that this was before kind of China went more authoritarian. And as a result, a lot of Western nations pulled back from China. So, but that's, I think, already been established. It's a useful and newsworthy story in and of itself for this reason. However, there's also some facts from that story that I think also are worth noting. One is that apparently this meeting that occurred, this Paul King-Jin character was one of like a dozen people in the room in like a rich, sort of an executive inn in Richmond, BC. So this was, it sounds to me like this was some kind of a bunch of donors were collected in a room, and Trudeau was doing like the thanks to the donors kind of a scenario. It doesn't sound like Trudeau met with this individual one-on-one for any reason. He was just a guy in the room with a dozen other people, probably people who were supplying, who were donating to the campaign, which of course is legally able to do. The other thing that I think is also notable is that, as I said, while I do think it's a newsworthy story in and of itself and for its own self, and it does tell us again that early in that juncture there was poor judgment from Trudeau. What it isn't evidence of at this particular point is that Justin Trudeau himself was involved in anything dodgy or involved with money laundering or involved with organized crime. The fact that he was in a room with a guy who 2 years later was found to be accused of money laundering doesn't prove that Trudeau knew that the guy was in the room, knew who the guy was, knew that the guy was involved with organized crime at all. And I would just remind conservatives who have really gotten themselves frothy about this particular story that, remember the how a lot of people on the left went crazy when Pierre Poilievre shook hands with the Diagolon dude? Remember that? And then all the conservatives were like, who's Diagolon? And the left was like, they're like this crazy, blah, 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 blah. And Pierre and all the conservatives were like, we were doing a rope line. Like, what, everybody comes up on a rope line. We shake pictures. It doesn't demonstrate endorsement for Diagolon. What are you talking about? There's kind of a similar benefit of the doubt that you have to give Trudeau here, absent more evidence, absent any evidence of a quid pro quo, right? Politicians meet with lots of people all the time, and they especially meet with donors all the time. It doesn't necessarily prove that there's a quid pro quo unless you can show that there's some kind of quid pro quo. Unless you can show that there's something more substantial to the actual relationship, it doesn't mean anything. And it sure as hell isn't evidence. From where we are, where the evidence stands today, we are several miles of red string from some kind of weird conspiracy that we're sort of hearing from, implied from American sources, that Canada is this massive source of fentanyl into the United States as a result of organized crimes engaging in fentanyl labs in Vancouver, and that Justin Trudeau is somehow covering this all up because he's involved in organized. Like, the evidence isn't there for that from what I can see publicly. Like, that doesn't mean, of course, that there aren't fentanyl labs in Vancouver. Of course there are. That doesn't mean that there aren't organized crime rings in BC especially. We know that that's true. We know that organized crime remains a major problem in BC. We know also as well that the RCMP has traditionally been profoundly under-equipped to deal with white-collar crime. That is these are well-established things that are not in the realm of conspiracy land. It's a long-established problem here in Canada and in BC. But that can be true, and also it is true that Canada is not a major source of fentanyl into the United States. It's not a zero source. There's some, of course, but it's not really the cause of America's fentanyl problem, as far as we can tell, based on the evidence that we have at our disposal today. And so trying to spin this up into a giant, everyone's connected conspiracy, that's where you kind of lose me. Because I think that's getting into propaganda territory, and I think it's getting propaganda territory that serves American, particularly Trump's interest, and isn't necessarily rooted in fact, or at least not the facts that I have publicly available to me right now.
Yeah, I haven't followed this one closely. I've been busy this week with other things, but what I would say simply is that the voting public had all they needed. They knew all they needed to know to make up their minds about Justin Trudeau. The idea that there is some secret out there, or that the media was soft pedaling for him. The voters knew all they needed to know to draw the necessary conclusions, and he won 3 times. So democracy.
The other thing I would say is the reason why I think this is newsworthy and that I would keep track of it is because you never know where these stories go. I mean, remember back in Alberta, there was the story about the Chief of Staff, Marshall Smith, doing the Flames boxes that apparently the tickets had allegedly been given to him by Sam Raish, who was the guy who was providing the Turkish Tylenol to to the Alberta government.
Oilers Flames boxes or Oilers boxes?
Yeah, don't please.
I told you this before. Every hockey team to you is the Flames.
Calgary issue. But anyway, look, and in and of itself, that's not a really big story, but it was an important story because it set the table for more revelations to come later. And so it was an important newsworthy story in and of itself as a result of that reason. I don't rule out the possibility that we find out more information about Justin Trudeau's links to these people at a later date. And I think it's worth pegging or pinning this one as a result. But right now, based on the evidence that I have in front of me, which of course is limited, right? I don't have perfect information. I can only go by what I have. Like the idea that we're going to be seeing Justin Trudeau arrested based on what I know today, I think that's fantasy land. I just don't see evidence for that here. I don't see evidence of wrongdoing on Justin's part based on the stories that have been published here. And it's not to say that Justin Trudeau is innocent. I mean, this is a guy who's failed several ethics investigations at this point. So, okay, duly noted. That's all.
Duly noted. Yeah. We will come back in a moment, get you caught up a little bit of the some of the wild stuff from south of the border and some of the consequences that's happening abroad, including right where I sit, bathed in the warm glow of electric lights. For now.
Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
Matt, I want to make a point of only talking about America if we have to. and I do think we have to talk about America a little bit.
Well, that's the problem. Like that's a rule that will not actually end up meaning much because every week we're going to have to.
We're going to have to. I do think it's worthwhile to talk a little bit about what happened this week in America. We now have tariffs on aluminum and steel. It's interesting to note that it looks like these are kind of global tariffs, for lack of a better term. They're not targeting.
They're not targeting us specifically. They're hitting us because we're major providers, but it's not Canada targeting.
Well, yeah, but also because if they're more global, that means that we don't suffer any unique competitive disadvantage because as a result of the global tariffs. The other thing that I would note is on the tariffs on aluminum, America has no native source of aluminum. So they kind of have no choice but to continue taking our aluminum and then be taxed at a higher rate on it because there is no native or very little native aluminum manufacturing in America. So okie dokie then, America. You want to go tax your citizens for their increased aluminum use? Go for it. I mean, that's fine from our perspective. What is useful to remember here is that we did see some attempt at retaliation. Well, firstly, Canada has retaliated with targeted tariffs. The one that was flagged for me particularly was on computer products. That will hit it like Apple products in particular, I think. But, who knows? Great, super. The other thing, too, was there was an interesting little mini psychodrama this week with Doug Ford from Ontario saying we are going to, I believe, tax electricity exports going out to America. So they were going to tax their it wasn't a tariff, it was an export tax, I believe, right? Am I right? Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, no, that's it. Yeah, it would have basically been a surcharge applied.
A surcharge. There we go.
To the exports of electricity, and Ontario and Quebec are both major providers of electricity to the American Northeast.
And that caused Trump and his administration to just totally freak out. They started threatening 50% tariffs on Canada. Apparently, there was some kind of call between Ford and Lutnick, and things smoothed over. Ford decided to rescind the surcharge slash tax, and the Trump administration decided to remove the 50% threat and go back to the ordinary 25. One note: if you're going to escalate. You can't escalate and then
back down to settle for the status quo. Which is still bad. You didn't actually Ford didn't win in that exchange. Just so that we're clear. No, and in fact, what happened is that we signaled weakness to the Americans, who now know that they can just press harder to get what they want. They can just press harder, and we won't retaliate in any way that really harms them. So good job, Team Canada. Good job, Team Ford. I blame not Ford. I blame the continued federal chaos for the lack of direction, the continued federal void, which has forced Ford to sort of step into this role. We're not sending our best, guys. We're not sending our best. I don't know what else to tell you here. I asked a friend of the line, Phil Lagasse, this morning. There is a weird gap between when Justin Trudeau resigned and when Mark Carney is sworn in. And I actually said to Phil, who the hell is the executive? And I know it's not going to matter. So it's the king who delegates those authorities to the governor general. So there was a brief window of about 38 minutes today where the executive authority in Canada was the governor general on behalf of His Majesty. with a cabinet and everything, but no prime minister. And I just find that fascinating. But the problem is, like, when I was tweeting about that, more than one person joked that, you know, in the event of a gap between Justin Trudeau's resignation and Mark Carney swearing in, Doug Ford becomes prime minister. And, you know, I tweeted earlier this week, and it was funny. Like, it was, I don't know, I was feeling saucy. It was purely a bait tweet where I had tweeted, the important thing to know about Doug Ford is that he's not the kind of guy who'd ever back down on a decision. The man is not for turning. And dozens of people who don't know me were like, what are you talking about, you idiot? He flips all the time. What are you, some Tory hack? So I was just entertaining myself. Because, of course, Doug, he's a marshmallow. Like, this is what he does. Like, he picked a fight he couldn't win. And I agree with you. He lost. But, and I'm not saying this in Ford's defense, even in defeat, you can learn interesting things. We learned interesting things this week. Unfortunately, the Americans learned things about us, but we learned things about them. First of all, electricity is a pain point. Mm-hmm. And a premier who is less gormless than Doug Ford could maybe do something with that, or perhaps Prime Minister Carney could do something with that. And I've mentioned this to you before, one of the strategies we might have to adopt, I've been thinking of calling it the wild weasel, but unfortunately that means suppression of any enemy air defenses. So I think we need a better term for it than that. So we need a term to describe throwing a rabid weasel into a dark bus. One of the things that we could maybe be doing, and this is in line with Asshole Canada, is saying to guys like Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, or Peter Navarro, who's been telling us to tone down the commentary, no, fuck you, we're going to do more. And we're not doing this because it's productive. We're doing this to make your lives miserable. And
you personally.
Yes. Howard Lutnick, Peter Navarro, and I'm sorry guys, in the vanishingly unlikely chance you hear this, I don't mean me, but I'm saying Canadian officials should communicate to guys like Marco Rubio and Lutnick and Navarro and anyone else, we're going to do stupid and unpredictable shit to make your life suck. And if you want us to stop, you've got to talk some sense into the boss. And if you can't, then you're no good to us, and we're going to throw the occasional rabid weasel into the bus and turn off the lights.
Fuck weasel?
Pardon me?
Fuck weasel?
Fuck weasels, I think, might have
it's a little too pornographic.
Well, it could go, like, I like it. I like the way you're thinking.
Yeah, you like the way I'm thinking.
There's a risk people would misinterpret our meaning if we start talking about throwing fuck weasels onto dark buses.
Not weasel. Not weasel.
Rabid weasels or psycho weasels or things like that. And fuck weasels, I don't know, we'll talk about that later. Maybe that's premium subscriber content.
Yeah, we'll get there.
One of the things, and you know, I'm looking at the costs of what Donald Trump is doing is starting to add up. You know, Panama starting to look at developing an armed forces. The Greenlanders looking to see if the French will deploy forces there. I mentioned this before in one of our earlier segments, the French talking about doubling their nuclear deterrent. We're looking at the Poles wanting nukes in the United States, and this is what I think is interesting. An increasing number of people, like this, look at Donald Trump's approval ratings. There was fresh polling out this week. He's cratering. And I think the market's cratering, and we know that's a pain point for him. We know that his approval rating is tanking. He has a razor-thin congressional majority. And I'm not saying any of this stuff's going to happen in time to save us. But all of these things happening at once might give us the narrowest window of opportunity to say to a guy like Lutnick, you can't afford one more problem today, but we're going to make one for you. And we're going to continue making one more random problem for you in very unpredictable and stupid ways, even harmful ways. But you're going to have to burn time and energy and capital dealing with this. And we're just fucking crazy enough to do it. And then you throw the weasel into the bus.
And I think that can't be underestimated, is like putting a price on time. Like, we'll do something and maybe it will only take 4 hours out of your day to deal with. I was thinking, remember there was a documentary about people who were trying to reverse scam 419 scammers? Did you ever see that documentary?
No,
Where it was
but
just
I
like,
know
it was
what
like,
you mean, yeah.
like it was the people who will call up like from like the Nigerian princess, and like there will be reverse 419 scammers whose job will be to string these guys along, right? Like
Because the longer they're on the phone with you, that's some grandmother out there who doesn't give over her credit card number.
Yeah, and it's like the small little thing that you can do to make their lives easier, to eat their day, to eat their time, even if it's 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours here and there. Like, these guys don't have 4 hours in their schedule in a day to deal with a problem. That's going to throw his entire week off. Good. Use it. The other thing I was just like to say is like one thing that Carney said during his speech, and I thought that this was really smart, and that is, no, we're not going to chase, essentially what I took from his speech is, no, we're not going to be chasing the ping pong ball every day.
Going to Europe. We're going to London and Paris.
We're going to London and Paris. We're not going to Washington. What we're going to do is you crazy fucks do whatever the hell you feel you need to do. Put on whatever tariffs you want. And when you're ready to negotiate or you realize that this was probably a mistake, you give us a call when you're ready to give us some respect. I actually think that's the right mentality.
Me too.
I actually think that's correct. I don't think we should do we have to retaliate. I understand there are lots of people who are just like, yes, but retaliating hurts us. I know, I get it. It's not economically smart. It's game theory smart. It's a totally different situation.
It's about ruining Lutnick's day.
It's about ruining Lutnick's day in teeny tiny ways. That's what we're doing here. So I get that it's punishing us to do this. I get it, but I also understand that people who don't play the game theory game wind up losing, so we have to retaliate. So fine, we retaliate. And then let Donald Trump go off on Truth Social. Let them do whatever they need to do. That's fine. You give us a call when you're ready to give us a call.
Every time Peter Navarro tells us to tone it down, I know that Donald Trump has yelled at Peter Navarro and we've ruined his day.
Yep. That's what we want to do. We want to ruin Peter Navarro's day every single day.
Or maybe not every single day. Let him have a couple of good days in a row. And just when he starts to feel like things are coming around, bam, there's a fucking weasel in the bus.
Yes.
Fucking weasel in the bus is okay. Fuck weasel. Like
No, you're right. It needs to be something weird. Like I said, nut weasel, kind of, because the weasel eats the nut is kind of what I'm thinking. But
probably not going to do better than
weasel,
rabid.
You know, what's wrong with rabid? Rabid, it just doesn't have a ring to it, you know?
So, see, wild weasel is perfect, but the Air Force took it already. Like I said, wild weasel missions are when you're bombing enemy air defenses.
All right,
so,
yeah. Well, I think we there's a
I don't know, it might
history,
come to that.
There's a long history in journalism of stealing military phrases and metaphors. I think we can do that here. It's not well known enough.
Wild weasels for international diplomacy.
Wild weaseling?
I still think it's bombing enemy air defenses, but whatever, we can work with it.
I mean, I don't see it because I don't have that military background. Wild weaseling?
Yeah, okay, we'll work with it.
So, someone in our comment section is going to come up with something brilliant.
We'll throw this open to the commenters.
Right.
You know what? And like, gosh, we're not putting our best foot forward here, sending Doug out there to play hardball. Like,
so bad.
You know, we've made a lot of criticisms of Trump. Like, not even a criticism of Trump. Something we've been trying to tell people about Trump that's different than Trump 1 is that Trump 2 is older, less engaged, seems a little more brain-addled. It's much more dependent than he was previously on the people around him. And that is why I think a lot of his policy is going to be unpredictable. Because last person to talk to him is going to get his way. We've talked a lot about this since November. But I look at Doug Ford. It's the same fucking thing. The last person to yell at Doug Ford wins. So it was Lutnick this week. But I can imagine another version of Doug Ford who would... Like I said, we didn't win, but we identified pain points and we burned a few hours of Lutnick's time, and that's not nothing. So next week, let's just fucking throw 100% surcharge on electricity, but only for 6 hours. And then we just announce, hey, in 6 hours, we're dropping it back to the normal price. But right now, here's a surcharge. Or you know what? We're just going to shut this down. And there's things the Americans can do. They can fight back. Yeah, I know. I'm not saying we win. I'm just saying we fuck up Howard Lutnick's lunch.
I love it. Well, I think that's all I have to say today.
Asymmetrical strategy. Asshole nation has to fight asymmetrically. Send me your weasels. I won't fuck them, but send them to me. And
Okay.
That's more of a Jen thing.
We've gone too far. We've gone too far in places. Okay, that's all I have to say today. Like and subscribe. Check us out at www.readtheline.ca.
And see the show notes for all of our new social media accounts. Check those out.
Yeah.
If you use TikTok, Instagram, Threads, give us a follow there. It really does matter. Once we get above a minimum threshold, we'll be able to start live streaming our content there. It's really helpful, guys. So if you can do that, we really, really appreciate it. It's just a quick way to help out the line.
Oh, and what do we want to say? If the writ drops between like now and next week, which it very well might, follow the line. We've got lots of fun things planned for the election. It's going to be great. We're going to bring back Bullshit Bulletin. It's going to be awesome.
Yep, working on what we're calling the anti-panel, which is where we're going to get a group of, I think I firmed up who it'll be, but we'll announce it when the time comes, where we're going to do a weekly written roundup of the campaign, but with a twist. So I'll leave it at that. I'm gonna let that one marinate in your brains. We're gonna have a lot of fun in the election.
Elections are good for us. We love that. We love elections. They're
we
fantastic.
do, but also they make me sad.
Yeah, but everything makes you sad.
No, lots of things make me happy. They're just harder and harder to find them.
Okay.
Like
anyway.
Howard Lutnick ruined my lunch. He weaseled me.
Like and subscribe. Check us out. Bye.
Bye.